anyhow. This has nothing to do with that. That's what I've been looking at and seeing. What I want to know from you is, where do we go from here? I mean, is this Brexit going to really happen? Is the UK going to leave the EU?
My view, Dave, is that it's almost irrelevant at this point whether the UK actually leaves the European Union, but I do think they will. But the big thing that stands out, at least in my mind, and the relevance of this vote to leave, it's more that it was a rebuke of the globalist movement forward. And when I say the globalist movement forward, what I'm specifically talking about is the rush towards one world government, one world currency, one world religion, which is the mantra of the globalist clique, the uber elites who seemingly have been shepherding or guiding world affairs for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And this seems to me to mirror the movement that's going on in America, that's being manifested with the populist support of Donald Trump. That's another pot on the stove of bubbling nationalism rearing its head. So yeah, I think there's a lot more to this Brexit vote than what might first meet the eye, because it encapsulates the rejection of the globalist creed.
Now, we hear from the central bankers, the EU, where they're saying, well, because of what's happening with the UK and their referendum, we're going to make the EU even stronger. We're going to go into Africa, try to get some of those nations to join up with the EU. We're going to make this into like an EU empire. Do you see this happening?
There have been other great thinkers in the history of humanity who had similar visions of basically taking over the world. A couple of names that come to mind are Adolf Hitler, Napoleon Bonaparte. Anyway, these stories don't ever tend to end well for the people with such grandiose visions. And I suspect that this mal-concocted notion of taking over the world for the good of mankind will have a similar ending.
Do you think other countries at this point are going to vote out of the EU? I mean, we hear a lot of calls from other countries saying they'd like to have a referendum. Do you see this happening?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a list of at least 8 countries already that are talking much along that line, and I really feel that this Brexit vote is a really big spanner in the gears of the march towards the one world government. I just don't think its relevance or its importance can be understated.
I wanted to move on to gold right now. And since December, I mean, gold was back, 1,050 or so back in December of 2015. And we've been seeing gold surge since that time. What is your take on why gold is all of a sudden just moving up right now?
Well, it's a combination of fiat money is failing before our eyes. We've got 12 or 13 trillion dollars worth of sovereign debt in the world currently trading in negative interest rates. And this is all because, Dave, the fiat money is doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is fail. Every fiat currency that's ever been introduced on the planet has failed. Our current fiat regime will fail. And we're seeing evidence that it is failing in front of our eyes. And the only thing that's kept gold from surging much higher has been a hallucinating application of paper contracts in the form of futures that have been sold on recognized exchanges keep the price from absolutely riveting higher. But to wit, the price of metals will rivet higher, and it's only a matter of time, because the amount of paper selling that's been occurring on the paper exchanges for metal have been, let's just say, eye-watering, and very soon these exchanges will lose credibility as a proxy for or for any kind of legitimate price discovery, because the amount of paper contracts that are being sold, as represented by the rise in open interest, is making a mockery of the notion that these are fair or free markets, period.
Now, you mentioned paper contracts, but I've been noticing starting in December that it seems like it's getting harder and harder for the central banks, governments, to throw these paper contracts at the gold market to bring it down. And each time they do it, we're seeing the market come down a little bit, but then it surges much higher after that. Do you think they're losing control of the precious metal market?
Oh, absolutely they are. And the reason they're beginning to, we're seeing signs of them losing control, Dave, is because they're losing credibility. Because when you throw that many paper contracts, at the precious metals price, people start to ask questions, and the other thing that's occurring is that people are starting to understand that when they hold paper contracts, they don't really own anything that's tangible. And so what we're seeing in response to this massive rise in open interest, bigger players are beginning to, and increasingly are demanding, the real thing, as in physical bullion. And it's the war of the demands for physical bullion versus the supply of paper. That's the real war that's being waged. And ultimately, the demand for physical bullion will trump the paper price, because for all the paper that the officialdom throws at the metals, they still have to expel some physical to basically to make their lies, or make their surreptitious interventions, to make them credible. They have to expel some physical precious metal into the marketplace to back up their paper, basically their paper shenanigans. And at some point, the cupboard will be bare, and they won't have the small amounts of physical that are required to back up their false claims being made through the paper markets. And once the cupboard's bare, then it will not be a grind higher. It'll be like a dam bursting, and prices will rocket higher.
So as gold continually trends upward, what happens to the dollar?
Ultimately, the dollar will be toast. But for the time being, gold and the dollar have been rising together, because there's still a lot of people in the world who believe that the dollar possesses safe haven qualities. Ultimately, faith in the dollar will end up having been a fool's errand, and people will realize that holding dollars is not like holding gold or precious metal at all.
Now, we've been seeing China and Russia, they've been duplicating the SWIFT payment system, exchanges. Do you think Russia and China, do you think they're ready to take over the monetary system, because the dollar is dying and the U.S. monetary system is heading in a downward trend, heading into the abyss? Do you think they have the ability to take over the monetary system? Do you think they're going to take over the monetary system?
I think it's inevitable that a Chinese-led initiative will displace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. I feel that it's coming. The timing of exactly when it occurs, good thing to guess or to ponder. But my feeling is that it can't be too far away. It may be a matter of weeks. It may be a matter of months. I don't think it's a matter of years anymore.
So as things move from west to east, what do you think the Fed, the U.S. government, the EU. What is their plan?
Well, I certainly hope it isn't a nuclear war.
Well, we all hope that.
but increasingly, it looks like they might actually be thinking that that is a viable option.
So you think their solution for China and Russia taking over the system is to start war?
Generally speaking, that's exactly what history would suggest is in the offing.
So, I mean, if we look around the world, we do see a lot of provocations throughout the South China Sea. We see it in the Middle East. We see it with Russia and Eastern Europe. So we do see a push for war. Do you think that they're going to try to start war before the collapse, or do you think the collapse will occur and then they'll start war?
Well, I think that if we get a major war, a lot of this is going to be moot, and I mean typically this is what occurs when economies fail, when currencies fail. The powers that be start a big war. They'll either blame the collapse on the war, or the war will be the reason for the collapse. And I mean, at that point, I think really debating, it's like a chicken and an egg argument, which came first. Once you're in a bloody big war, I don't think it really, how it started, it becomes quite immaterial. The carnage is what counts.
Yeah,
unfortunately, Dave.
Yeah, that's true. Rob, are you saying that the central banks right now, they have no other tricks up their sleeves? Do you think they'll try maybe QE4 or something like this just to try to keep the economy running?
Well, I mean, QE4. I've lost track of the QE.
Yeah, I know.
Because, like, in my view, Dave, we've been in QE now since 2007, and we had QE, and it's really never stopped. I view it a little bit, really kind of like a relay race where the baton gets passed from one lackey to the next lackey, because it started off with American intervention in terms of QE, and then the baton, it seems, was passed maybe to the European Central Bank, and Japan's had their turn running with the baton for a while. But the one thing that's been constant since 2007, somebody's been running with the baton, printing money like it's going out of style, and this has not stopped. And all these central banks, they're all linked through mutual swap arrangements. So I mean, if as long as one of them's printing, or whether one or two or three of them are all printing together, the common element here, Dave, is that there's printing occurring. And capital can move from one currency to the next currency very, very, very quickly. When the European Central Bank prints euros, and people have the prospects of investing their euros in European bonds that have negative yields, or they can buy American bonds that have some yield. It's natural for them, particularly when their yields start to switch their euros into American dollars, making the dollar look strong so that they can get a yield, period, instead of a negative yield. So, I mean, whether the Fed's printing or whether the European Central Bank is printing doesn't really matter one iota. I mean, the outcome is the same.
That is absolutely true. We're also seeing out in Europe, the Italian banks, they're having major problems with a lot of bad loans. Do you think the Italian banks might be a catalyst to set this whole entire economic collapse off?
Well, Dave, at this point, it could be the Italian banks, it could be Deutsche Bank, it could be maybe one of the big French banks. We look at some of the. It could be maybe even a big Japanese bank. I mean, Japanese banks are known to be extremely heavily invested in Japanese equities. And what did global equity markets do on the back of this Brexit vote? They tanked, absolutely tanked. But that lends one to the maybe a bigger question is whether these banks actually have accounting. Because I know in the instance of American banks, I know that American banks can be granted waivers where they don't have to report their true financial condition if it's deemed to be in the interests of national security. So, how do you measure the health of a bank if they don't have accounting? They could be insolvent and they just don't tell you. And I'm certain that was the case back in 2007 and 2008. I mean, Morgan Stanley, they tried to marry Morgan Stanley to anybody in the world that would take them. They couldn't find a taker. Morgan Stanley was a terrible credit in the credit markets. And yet in a 3-month period in 2007-8 timeframe, Morgan Stanley put on $8 trillion worth of credit derivatives, interest rate credit derivatives in a 3-month period. Who do you think was the other side of those trades, Dave? Morgan Stanley couldn't borrow money in the overnight market back then, but somehow they managed to put $8 trillion worth of medium-term, anything from short up to medium-term interest rate credit-sensitive instruments. They put on $8 trillion of those in 3 months. Well, you know what, Dave? The real world did not do that business with Morgan Stanley. That was done with the U.S. Treasury, and that was a stealth recapitalization or a bailout of Morgan Stanley. That's what that was. And it's absolutely ludicrous that nobody in the world, nobody in the mainstream, nobody who wears a pretty suit on Wall Street will even point this out. And they certainly don't want to debate anyone about it. But it's a complete and utter farce. That was an insolvent institution that was bailed out in front of our eyes. And listen, you can go and read about it. All this data is lodged in quarterly derivatives reports at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. You can go on the website. You can look at the data. The data doesn't lie. It's math.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think most of these banks that we're looking at are completely insolvent right now, and they're just continually pumping money into them to keep them operational. Let me ask you, from the people that you speak to, that you have contact with, Rob, are they preparing for the collapse of the system?
Yeah, people in high places, certainly in foreign lands, are preparing for an existence where the dollar is not the world settlement currency. I mean, look at the preparations that are being made by the Chinese, by the BRICS countries. They're building parallel infrastructure to that of the World Bank, to that of the IMF, of settlement systems or platforms. Paralleling the clearinghouse interbank payment system, which is American centric, and the Fedwire, which are the two predominant means of settling world trade currently. The Chinese are working with in conjunction with the SWIFT people in Europe. And it's not a coincidence, and it's not by accident that these parallel structures are being erected. I mean, there's only one reason you would undertake conduct such an undertaking. That's because you're planning for a world where America is not in the equation, and this is going on before our eyes. And anybody who refuses to see it is living in denial.
Yeah, they are living in denial because we see it every single day, and we see so many different things happening. Rob, from your viewpoint, I mean, the president, the Treasury Secretary, they're out there, and the Fed, I should say, they're out there telling us that the economy is doing fine. The American economy is strong. It's the global economy that's a little bit weak. In your viewpoint, Rob, how bad is the economy right now?
The global economy is comatose. Shipping activity is at like multi-year lows. You know, debt has never been as big or as bad as it is right now. And you know, at the end of the day, Dave, you can't solve a problem globally. The problem is, and central bankers even admit this, that we have a debt problem on a global level. And the problem with too much debt is you can't solve that problem by adding more debt. And that's exactly what's been going on.
I agree, because the Biz came out, I think it was maybe a week ago or so, that said we need to reduce the amount of debt in the world.
And that means that things have to be written off. And that portends going forward an even weaker economy or weaker economic conditions going forward, Dave. So all this claptrap about things are good and there's a recovery. There is no recovery. There never has been a recovery. Business is moribund. Labor participation rates in America certainly don't support the notion that there has ever been a recovery. Because we're basically at historic lows in terms of labor participation rates in America, and to cover this up, all they've done is they've doctored data, everything from inflation rates to unemployment rates, and of course, when you doctor inflation, you've implicitly doctored your GDP readings. So no, we haven't had a recovery, and I don't think we're likely to get one because we have illusory markets. We've got officialdom's footprints and fingerprints all over the equities price. They've been actively complicit in rigging interest rates to zero and lower, and their footprints and fingerprints are all over the commodities market. The reality, Dave, is that everything in our economic existence today, it looks more like a lesson in central planning than it does in free market capitalism. And that's a pretty sad commentary in itself.
Yes, and people have been asking me of how bad will this get? And we look at Venezuela, we see, people running into the markets trying to get food, trying to get supplies. How bad do you think it's going to be when everything starts to implode on itself?
Well, we live in a world, Dave, where our supply chains are all just in time. So any disruptions to our just in time supply chains could and very likely will lead to empty shelves in grocery stores and shortages of critical commodities and products. So do I think we see that occur here? I think it's inevitable at some point that it does, and that being said, it's nothing I wish for, but there again, I think if you're stuck on the belief that can't happen here, I honestly think you're doing a very good ostrich impersonation.
Rob, thank you for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can catch me on the web at kirbyanalytics.com.
Rob, thank you for being on the Spotlight.
My pleasure.